On July 2nd, 2023, we celebrate the 150th anniversary of the founding of Culbertson, Nebraska. The people of Culbertson and their pioneering families have made this rural village what it is today. A small community of innovative and resilient citizens full of pride for their hometown. These are a few of their stories.
Okay, I'm Dick Trail.
Pat Bell Brown.
John Walters.
Ron Barger.
I'm Russell Eisenhart.
Pauline Frick.
William W. Stanky.
Norman T. Byrne.
George Haller.
Willem A. Wagner Hawkinson.
Richard Sensel.
I'm Kathy Durnovich.
I'm Linda Piper Rooney.
Roger Colbert.
Joylyn. I was a Brown.
Denise Jumps.
My name is Jackie Rippon.
I'm Pat Hoyt Forge.
I'm Virginia Lynn Hoyt.
She tells a story when her uncle and his wife and family moved out here. They had just gotten here and they weren't here very long, and his father died back in Germany. So he took his family to Hastings and they were going to take the train so he could go back to Germany and settle up the estate, and he could only afford one ticket. So he went ahead and went, and his family came back here. Well, they didn't have anything, so they lived in a cave along the river. And other people would take them food, and she would do little odd jobs for people to survive until he got back and got them going again. But I didn't realize, I think at that time wasn't there bank along the river? It wasn't low like it is now. Yeah, but there was no trees. But there was a cave along the river where they lived. I don't know their names. They would have been Hills. Their last name would have been Hill, because that's who lived here, was my mom's mother.
Grandpa and Grandma Wagner, George Wagner, they came in 1888 is where they got to the United States. They came by the way of New York City, and Grandpa and Grandma, when they arrived, they had $15 between them, and that was enough money for one of them to come west, but not both of them. So what they decided was that Grandma would stay in New York City and wash dishes for a while at a restaurant so she could get enough money to come west. So they first came then to Bloomfield, Nebraska, and was there about a year, and then in 1889 they came to Culbertson. Their first home was a dugout, and
South of the schoolhouse.
Yes.
About a block or 2 blocks.
Yeah, it was in that area, and their first son, Henry, was born there. Then after a while, they moved to a sod house where William May's father was born, and it was also in the east part of town. But the railroad track was going through Culbertson at that time, and that's what Grandpa did then. He got onto the railroad crew, and it wasn't too long, and here he was foreman of the crew, so they moved along with that railroad building till into Colorado, and their third child, Caroline, was born in Colorado. And they were there for a while. Then as a little time went on, some of the, Grandma and Grandpa were married in Russia in a double wedding ceremony with Grandma's brother. Grandma was a Hoke, and there's still many Hokes north of town. Let's see, when they were in, while they were still in Colorado, they had learned that some of the Hoke family came to Culbertson to settle, and so that kind of drew Grandpa and Grandma Wagner back to Culbertson area.
My great-grandmother, after the Civil War, she fell in love with this area and she wanted to homestead out south. Actually, you know what? It's out by the Stone Church anyhow, and she couldn't talk her folks into coming out here. She's 16, so she married a Civil War veteran and talked him into coming out, and they homesteaded out on Driftwood Creek, just what is that, 6-7 miles south here. It's where the Stone Church is anyhow. And after 3 years, then they had possession of 3/4 of ground, 3/4 sections. And then their neighbors, of course, around there had proved up, that's what they called it, and they owned a 1/4 section each. And my grandmother and her husband started buying 1/4 sections that when a person wanted to sell his ground, and he'd have a stake in life, and they mostly moved on west. And so they built quite an empire, really. They bought a lot of ground out around that area.
My granddad come across from Germany by himself, alone, at 13 years old.
Really? Wow.
And and then he landed in Clay Center, stayed with some people that was over there they knew, and then when he got about 24 years old, he homesteaded this place, but it was handed down from another guy, and because this fellow's wife, I'm having trouble remembering that name right now, but his wife got caught north of here somewhere a ways, about 2 miles north of here, in a prairie farm, and she had her baby with her, and a little baby, and she decided she found a big anthill, I mean a big one, and put the baby in the middle of the ant hill and fought the fire all around the outside of it. And she saved the baby, but it burned her bad enough she died. And so it actually killed her in a few days. But that's how this got transferred to my granddad.
In the beginning, my mom's parents lived in Russia. They were some of the Germans that had migrated to Russia and then came here. And that was in 1901 that they hit Ellis Island. When she came over, well, they came over because Grandpa's cattle were being stolen by the government people. And one evening they were come out to run some off, and the hired man went out and they killed him. And Grandpa says, "That's enough." He said, "We're leaving." And they tried to talk Grandma's twin sister into coming, and she said later. So anyway, in 1901, their baby was just a couple of months old when they came across on the ship. They had met a woman who had also had a baby, but she didn't have any milk, so Grandma nursed 2 children on the way over.
We're talking about how the Hoyts got to Hitchcock County, and the Hoyt name south of Culbertson was very big. There were lots of people, and we had, and our great grandfather, no, our great grandfather was a Civil War veteran, and he actually followed Sheridan's, General Sheridan, on his burning way to the coast, and he was left the Army as the Union Army, and he was in came out of Washington is where he was given his last paycheck. But they were allowed to have when the land was given away during the homestead, they were given, veterans were allowed an extra quarter of land, 160 acres of land. And so they actually came from New York and made it to Illinois, and that's where he picked up his bride, and her name was Priscilla Bobenmeyer, and they moved to Pawnee City, Nebraska, and they found out that this land was available out here, and so they had a wagon train of people come out, and they left from Indianola. They came out on this wagon train. They left Indianola and passed by this little village of Fairview and turned south at Culbertson and went down what is now Highway 17. And they turned east about 2.5 miles, and they had developed a homestead there, a dugout, and because it was there by the creek and it was deep enough that they could dig out there, and then they had could go down to the creek to get water, so they were in pretty good shape.
In '54, the Nebraska Territory was opened to settlement. That's 1854. And 1862, the Homestead Act. So those people that came here before that, they finally got the legal right to claim ground in 1862. This area was not probably habitated much at that point because they started coming in Omaha and Nebraska City, and then they spread by wagon. That was by ship, this was by wagon. So it took a while for people to decide where to settle. And this being a stretch where the railroad was coming through, in fact the railroad had already came a short distance this way by the time things started happening here. And they just needed some incentive. This was good ground, it seemed like the nice weather. There were not, when the cattle drives came through, and it was over like a 10-12 year period, because they first started coming as far as Ogallala when the train got to Ogallala, and they could haul cattle back to east. Without that incentive, most of it was just basically taking the cattle north during the summer where there was good grass, and then taking it further south to get them out of the rough climate that might have been up further north. But with the Ogallala being a transfer station to the east, it started bringing basically open ranch land. They wanted to come through. If they needed to stop for a while and eat, they could, because it wasn't claimed ground. And then along came the settlers, the homesteads, and they wanted to fence their land. And so the end of the cattle drives basically was there was just too many fences to fight.
They were straight south of Culbertson, and Culbertson was the closest town, and so they would take team and wagon and come in to buy supplies here. Incidentally, when they came out, Culbertson was the end of the railroad line. It was as far west as it had gone at that time, and so that's where the supplies came from. But you think about it, they would take about all day to make the trip in a horse and wagon to come here, buy supplies that they need, and then get back home before dark. So that'd take all day.
I remember going to it once, and I loved it. But it was right where, it was right on the corner across the street from the bank.
Where the gazebo.
Where the gazebo is, right. And it was made out of yellow brick. And when I'd walk home from school, I'd see little dents in the brick. And I finally asked somebody, how come there's holes in that wall? And they'd said, well, the cowboys used to stand up against there and knock against that with their spurs.
Oh, that's interesting. I've not heard that.
And they talked about all the different cowboys that would come. Jesse James was one of them. And so this was apparently quite a wild town in the beginning.
And we are listed in Wild Towns of Nebraska.
That's right. Yes, we are.
Bar in downtown south of where Branding Hardware was. The gentleman, so the story goes, the gentleman that ran it had a couple of drunken cowboys come in, and how they got drunk before they got there, I don't know. But they probably got drunk after they got there, and he just finally got tired of putting up with them. And one of them pulled out his gun and shot the ceiling of the place. And the stories differ a little bit here. One of them was that the bar owner had his family upstairs, and he was fearful that they might have got hit. And the other one doesn't say anything about family, but he kicked them out, told them never to come back. If he ever saw them again, he's going to kill them. A year later, they came back. And he promptly took care of the problem with the rodents that walked in the door. He ended up being convicted. He ended up dying in confinement. But the wild things that happened of that nature, when the cowboys came through, they were tired and ready for a break, and they knew that Ogallala was a ways away. And when they got to Ogallala and got their money, and they were handed probably some money for their efforts and traveling up, and also maybe a horse to get home with. Well, what's the first towns they come to? And they come through this valley, they come to Culbertson and Trenton, and they spend some money and have some fun and get drunk. And so it was probably a very wild town at times. So.
Building the church, the stone church, we had two uncles, great uncles, who were the dynamiters out on the stone ranch. They'd scoop up the stone and haul it from the stone ranch to where the church is. And all the neighbors and people would be building the church.
But Frank and Homer were only, 8 and 10? Mm-hmm. But they could move faster with the dynamite blowing things up. But they weren't old enough to drive the wagons with the stone over to the church. And James was a stonemason, so he dressed the stone, and then that's how they built the stone church. They had parties and lunches to get the material for the wood and the benches and inside the pews
and by the windows.
And to buy the windows, right.
They'd have box lunches and picnics. They had baseball games. The whole neighborhood would get together and have baseball games. It was quite a neighborhood.
They built that church. They went over south into the hills and they excavated limestone where there's outcroppings. Actually, limestone, when it's under the surface like that, was pretty easy to dig into. You'd take a brace and bit, and they'd make a series of holes, and then they'd put a little stick of dynamite there, and when they had everybody cleared away, they'd have my great uncles, about 12, 14 years old, they'd have them light the dynamite to break those chunks off while they were hauling, the adults were hauling it over to the church. And they shaped it and they built that structure we see today.
Right straight across from the barn on the creek. Well, way back when in the Indian days, and the cavalry had camped right there. On that, there was a great big tree down there that I used to play around, cottonwood tree, and it was big. It was, I think it took, they always figured it took 3 grown-ups to span it, to go around it holding hands. I mean, 6 of them, 6 people to span it. And it was bigger than that when I was a kid. I mean, and it had a hollow spot rotting out, and we used to crawl back and get back in there. You know, it was actually a little house. And anyway, the cavalry camped there one night, and they had one of those storms, which we've had a couple of since I grew up. And not very long ago, 20 years ago, this whole bottom was underwater. Well, they got caught there that night, and that it rained up by Hay Center and on up the Blackwood area, way up in there by Hay Center. It must have, you know, dumped 15 inches, 10, 12 inches, at least that much. And it come down, and they lost 6 guys, and most of everything they had. And I would assume there's a few of them made it right up and made it to the west here, because east wouldn't have done them much good for a ways. But I bet they was running from left or right to get away from that. But you get those flash floods down here.
I think the toughest thing was the fact that a lot of the people did not realize what was coming at them. And for many of them, it was probably a surprise. They did what they could, headed to higher ground. As you've heard in some of the previous people, I'm sure that they climbed trees. Buildings that floated away. The large number of people in a 75, 80 mile stretch that just disappeared. And some of them, they found their bodies, some of them they never found.
Were there some from Culbertson, the village of Culbertson, that did disappear?
I'm pretty sure there were. I can't give you names right now, but yes, there were some. When you get an area of water that's over a mile wide coming through a valley, it's going to take out a lot of farmsteads when you think about it being a quarter-mile homestead, was a quarter of a mile, or I think they could claim up to a mile or something like this. But there's a lot of homesteads that were down through the valley that disappeared. Buildings disappeared, people. So.
What caused the 35 flood?
A large amount of rain upstream, basically no dams or ways of restricting the water flow. And it probably wasn't, it probably was something that had occurred many times in the previous 300-400 years, but there just weren't people here.
Can you tell us some memories that you have about when the flood happened, Pauline?
Well, I know we had water all around our house, up to the windowsills.
So what about the flood of 35? That came down the river?
I remember the day afterwards we drove down to right out south of town here, down to the bottom of the hill. Mm-hmm. Drove down there, and they had a little rowboat. And the Jaegers and the Charlie Williams family were in the house right where Elliot's. I can't.
The elevator?
Right where Sisman lived out there now. I was Charlie Williams lived there. Or Jaegers lived there. Charlie Williams lived across the road and down a little bit.
Yes, that other.
And
yeah.
We came down there, and there was a stream of water running right south of Jaeger's house. Mm-hmm. Probably about 20 foot, 30 foot wide, and about 2 or 3 foot deep. Mm-hmm. And they had a boat. and they take it upstream, and they had a boat, had a rope on it, take it upstream a ways, rowboat, and row it across, and they had the rope on it in case it got away from them. And then they'd go down and they'd pull people back across from over there.
My grandfather on my mother's side had a boat, a 35 horsepower little motor, and then the 35 flood rescued people out of trees along the river down here.
Really?
She used to tell a story. She was real good friends with Jesse McNeese, Jesse Stubbs, and they lived down across the river, and she'd been over to see them and went home to do chores, and they were doing chores, and they were told that the flood came, and they come down, still on the hill, and watched the flood go through and wipe McNeese's out and put them all in trees. She missed it by about 2 hours being there.
They called Grandpa to come up, McNeese's did, because the water was coming. And so Grandpa went up with a wagon and mules, and they could see the water coming at Joe Couch's. So they got in the wagon and started, and the water caught up with them. So Grandpa and 10 others sat in the tree for 17 hours. And then Jack McNeese and Alfred were on ponies, and Jack fell off. So they floated on down, and Leland took the horses and went back to Grandpa and Grandma's. And Harlan he swam toward them and came out of the water, and he said to Leland, "Go get Jack." So Jack came floating down the river with the water, had a railroad tie he was hanging on to, and Leland rode the horse out in belly deep water and grabbed his hand, and that will be, yeah. So that was, and Leland told Lily and Kayla and I that
when Bazil's had the gravel pit down there, they sucked up a couple skulls and got caught in their stream, and they turned them into the university. Of course, there's no DNA then. You know, now they could have, that was probably in the 60s where they found them, so it would probably be DNA, just interesting stuff, but there were still people they never found out of that. And, interesting history.
So they're pretty sure that the skulls were from people that were in the flood?
They assumed that.
Probably somewhere in the valley, because it was a whole
because it was
side to side.
Long ways that went.
I grew up with electricity, but we didn't have running water in our house, so I can remember on our farmstead we had a box car, and it was a wash house, and it had the washing machine and the bathtub, so it had running cold water, but it didn't have hot water, so we had to heat the water up in the house, carry it out to the boxcar for the washing machine and to take baths. We had a heating stove in there to stay warm when we took a bath or did washing.
We didn't have an inside bathroom, and we didn't have hot water inside. She had a washer in the back porch, and we would bring that in the house, a wringer washer, and heat the water.
And we lived on a farm south of town, and I don't think there was electricity there for a little while, as I remember. So I think that was about the era when some of it came in around here. And televisions, I think my early high school years, we were still watching snow, hoping we would see a picture pretty soon. And it was quite something for all of us when it came through. I know my brother, Jim Gold, would run and get a small saddle he had and put on his cowboy hat to watch Gunsmoke.
When we were kids, the neighbor girl and I, we'd go to the movies, and the big thing for the boys was Tarzan, but for the girls it was Nyoka, the female Tarzan. And so we'd watch that, and then we'd come home and we'd climb up in her big trees she had old trees. We'd climb up there and we'd put ropes around and we'd swing out of the tree like Nyoka did. And we also played, she had a nice little porch on front of her house, and so we would play, put on plays and things like that. That was our entertainment.
You know, as I said, the activities were less back in the day, but my dad always said when his parents went to town, some of the neighboring parents went to town too, and the boys would get together and ride steers or whatever in the feedlot. And I think there were some injuries they didn't tell their parents about unless they just absolutely had to. So they kind of made their own fun. By the time I was in high school, there were some organized roller skating parties. There was a skating rink in McCook, and then we also had an ice skating pond down here by the river.
In the 50s, the river was still freezing then, and we had water in the river, and it would freeze in the winter, and we would ice skate on the river. And I usually was on my ankles most of the time instead of on my skates. But we would build a fire down at on the riverbank and go ice skating.
Oh, they're telling me that there's an ice skating story. Do you recall that?
Yeah, we skated from McCook to Culbertson.
On the river?
Yeah, on the river. Had to dodge the channels that were open, you know. But it was something to do.
All the way from McCook to Culbertson?
We always did some crazy thing about every Saturday.
Well, at one time in his life, Dennis had a boat.
Yes.
It was a metal boat, wasn't it?
Yep, little rowboat, yeah.
And we'd take it on the canal. And we would just sing, and we were sailors, boy.
We had more darn, and this was after 10 o'clock at night, you know. We'd never go up there when it was.
It's been in the summertime.
Oh, yeah.
The folks never worried about us when we were together because they knew we weren't out partying somewhere.
We weren't drinking, we weren't over in Herndon drinking. No.
Yeah.
That was our classmates.
Yeah.
At that time, evidently, we could take our car. I think we had about a half-hour lunch break, and you know, we could even take our car. I can remember going down to the track at the fairgrounds and racing around there at lunchtime, if you can believe that. So, you know, you couldn't do that today. But yeah, we would go around there, get a couple cars and race around the racetrack to see who could win. Load it up with a bunch of guys and away we would go, you know. I think some guys even ventured further away during lunchtime. They might have been a little bit late coming back, but I think they headed south. And came back and had an excuse why they were late coming back to school.
Our class was only around, I believe we had 18. They were small classes. And of course, you know, you went to school, all your grade school was in the lower grades. But I started band when I was in junior high, so I was in band for 6 years, and I loved band. We were so proud of our uniforms. The kids today think that's corny, but we was really proud, and I loved to march.
What did you play?
Clarinet. Played the clarinet, and we would, we was in competition like they are now. We got to go once to Lincoln and march at the halftime game down there.
Well, weren't you a cheerleader or a majorette? Majorette in school. I led the band. The marching band. Yeah, for a couple of years. I was a cheerleader. Yeah. Played in the band. You had a good band. Yes, yeah, we did. Yes, and we took in a lot of trophies. Yes. Yeah.
I hear you're the one that knows about the history of sports in Culbertson.
Huh?
The history of sports in Culbertson? Do you have some good sports stories or any of the history about that?
Well,
When did sports start up?
I'd be bragging, and I hate to do that.
That's okay. We like bragging.
We had great sports in town, high school. We played a little basketball, football, and track.
Can you tell us about your story of when you went to state and track?
Winning state track meet.
When you went to the track meet and won?
Yeah.
Can you tell us about that? How did you get down to Lincoln?
Let's see, I think I hitchhiked down.
You hitchhiked down?
Yeah, tell us about that. So you were a pretty good, pretty fast track athlete?
No, I thought I was. Probably wasn't too good. But I won all events. Shot put and discus. Broad jump were my favorite.
What year did you go to the state championship and won Class C?
41, 1941.
1941. And you were the only one that went?
Yeah.
What events did you compete in that year at the state meet? What events did you compete in to win the state championship?
Shot put and discus and broad jump. Won 3 events.
And you won the whole championship?
Yeah.
Did they give you a trophy?
Yeah. I guess so. Haven't showed it to me much. I think in 1942, I think it was, they had the big fight at this football field.
Oh.
Trenton. And
In Culbertson?
Culbertson were playing. They both were good. And Culbertson, I think, scored a touchdown or something. And a kid by the name of Vastine was the quarterback.
Mm-hmm.
And he jumped on somebody. Just up and jumped on him.
Mm-hmm.
And the referee called a foul on him, 15 yards. He jumped on the referee.
Oh.
They started a fist fight. And we had some big men back then. The old man that run a cafe up there weighed about 300 pounds. And Shorty ripping out south of town here. Shorty weighed about 300, but he was just a big man, Shorty was. Mm-hmm. And they stand hammering on each other, and they couldn't hit each other hard enough to knock the other one down. And just as the game was over, the superintendent turned the lights out. It was a wonder somebody didn't get hurt.
Yeah.
They're lucky nobody.
Sounds
We
like
never played football or any sports with Trenton for 4 years.
Oh, really?
There were a lot of businesses back then when I grew up in Culbertson. I kind of made a list of it, and I can remember in Culbertson itself, downtown, there were 30 businesses at that time. About everything you needed, a couple grocery stores. There was Thompson's IGA, and then there was a Walker's Grocery. I can remember a place where we took our eggs, sold our eggs, took our cream, and then we also picked up our little chicks at that particular place in the spring when we raised chickens.
So Dad worked in the shop and Grandpa ran the business. That went on for quite a while, and then when we got a little older, then Mom did the bookwork for them. And they had sold international tractors and equipment and lots of hay balers. They were wire tie at that time. And you know how farmers are, they work 24/7. And so in the evenings, Dad would go to Trenton to the lake to go fishing, so he wouldn't be home. So if they called, he didn't have to go fix a baler. So once in a while, he'd be gone, and Mom would go with him sometimes and So the farmers would call, and when I was a little older, I would talk to them, and I'd say, well, if you know what it is you need, I can go up and open the store and you can get the parts. So I did that once in a while. They'd get the part and I'd just write it down and they'd take it. You know, people charged everything and you trusted everybody.
The Beckwith hardware store, not hardware store, secondhand store. That place was so full of stuff in there you couldn't hardly walk. And I remember when they sold it out, they had an auction every night. People stood out in the street and they'd bring stuff out and auction it off. And the only thing I can remember them auctioning off, I never bought any of them, but they were the clamp-on roller skates and the clamp-on ice skates. They were selling them for 5 cents a pair.
When did they put the electricity in the summer?
In about 1945, because that's when it come in. And my uncle was Glenn Gettle was the main electrician around here, and it went in the house right now. I remember when they was putting the poles out here, and I was about 3 years old or 4 years old, something like that, when they did this. And I was pestering them, I know that, those guys that were doing it. I knew most of the guys that, for a long time, that helped my uncle. They worked for my uncle because he was an electrician. He had a appliance store in Culbertson, and that's right straight on the other side of the old hotel down here where the old, it was in between the hotel and the movie theater. The building that's there was all under one roof, kind of. If you look today, it's still existing there. And so that's the reason we got electricity right away, and then we got 3-phase right away.
So since you lived out on the farm, Grandma, when you came to town, what day did you usually come to town? And
Saturday.
And what'd you do on Saturdays when you came to town?
Brought the cream and eggs.
Where'd you take that?
To Mickish's. Did you go to Mickish, Janice?
Yeah.
Mickish's.
Was there more than one place you could take your cream and eggs in town?
Yeah.
Yes, there was. Mm-hmm.
You remember the rectangular milk jugs?
Oh, yeah.
And they had that little spout on them, and you'd save them. You get 10 of them, you get the show free.
I don't remember that part of it.
Yeah, you'd save them little tabs. You just peel off the corner. That's when people quit milking and started buying milk, you know.
What time was that?
That would be early 50s. Yeah.
A lot of people stopped milking around then?
Yeah, the cows kind of dried up shortly after the horses, wasn't it? Well,
I remember taking milk to Mr. Mickish's business, wasn't it Mr. Mickish's?
Yeah.
But then they made cream and separated the cream and the milk.
And then Riley's, Dave Riley's folks had it after that. And then the Woods Creamery was up north there. Yeah, there's 2 creameries, 3 implement stores. There'll be an international case, John Deere.
But did you go to the movies much?
Oh yeah, went to the movies every weekend. My Uncle Lloyd Ridgway run the projector.
It cost about 5 cents or 10 cents to go to the movie. And they had popcorn. I don't remember having drinks, but we had popcorn.
I remember going to Gone with the Wind with my mom.
Do you remember when you went to the movie theater, do you remember how many people would usually go? Was it pretty packed? Was it pretty full?
Culbertson's was real busy, yeah.
What were some of the shows that you saw there? Do you remember?
One was Mrs. Miniver. That was one of my favorite movies at that time. But I don't remember a lot of, I never missed one.
Also, we can't forget up there where Kugler's had their gas station, we had a zoo, and I was just fascinated by that zoo. We would at noon cut across the football field, go up there, get a snack at the cafe. They must have sold candy, and then we would give the animals there some attention. And I think that zoo probably existed almost until I want to say close to 1970 possibly. They had monkeys, coyotes, peacocks, buffalo. It was really nice. The monkeys were in a building that were inside, the peacocks were outside, the buffalo, of course, were outside, the coyotes were outside. But it was a stopping point for many people going through here.
My husband worked there when we were first married. Well, even before we were married, he worked there. There was a sign at Cambridge, Nebraska that said the Culbertson Zoo, and it had the couglers, bears, monkeys, and peacocks. Well, while my husband was working at the station, some travelers drove in and said, we'd seen a sign at Cambridge and we've come to see what a cougler was.
We used to spend hours up there. You know, one of my favorite things was the peacocks. I just thought they were so neat. I couldn't wait for them to spread their feathers and maybe get a loose feather that might fly out or something. You know, that was a big deal back then. And the snake pit, I was terrified of snakes, but I couldn't help but look at that snake pit, you know.
In the wintertime, Mrs. Cooper would take the monkeys and put them in her basement. And she invited me to come down and play with those monkeys. So I would do that occasionally.
A kid here in town, he can drink pop like you couldn't believe.
Oh.
But they'd buy 2 bottles of pop. And they'd make a bet whether Hank could drink faster than the bears. And those bears, you stick a bottle of pop up, and they just did inhale it, just like they'd suck a bottle dry.
Really?
There wasn't much entertainment back then.
Going on to the Culbertson Fire, Rural Fire District. It was organized in 1954, and I know I had to go to the vote of the people in the country to get on the tax roll. I don't know, I haven't found anything out about it, but I do know that they had to go on the roll, vote to be able to form the Culbertson Rural Fire District. In 79, winter 79, 80, about 15 of the Culbertson Fire Department took a first responder class, and we had some discussion about ambulance and everything. The fire department really wasn't interested in getting into the EMS. So Jerry L. Williams from Trenton had taught the class, and we got together with him and had a town hall meeting, and few of us volunteered to create a board to create the Culbertson Rescue.
Does the community help the fire department?
Yes. They help out when we have fund drives. Same with the ambulance. When we have a fund drive, a cookout or something, it is very well attended by everybody.
The one thing that to really give you some idea of how Culbertson has supported us, we do not get any tax money to do this. The fire departments do, most ambulance services do have a certain amount of tax. Ours is totally volunteer and self-supported. Now, we apply for Hanson grants and they have been absolutely wonderful about helping us, but we have to buy all our own equipment. all the training most of the training that's been done, the rescue squad has definitely paid for it, and the books and everything else, and all people have to do is say they're willing to do it. So it's all because of the support of the ambulance, of the community to the ambulance.
No, Culbertson was a great place to grow up, for our kids to grow up, and I can't say nothing. It's been good. I couldn't say nothing bad about it.
So most of my years have been not living in town, but we always came to town and took part in all the activities that went on, enjoyed every bit of it.
I don't know what the future holds. I hope good things.
Well, I think about the fact that our kids could walk home. They didn't have to have their parents or somebody, an adult, going with them. And I think to some extent they can do that yet today, and that's something that you can't do in a larger place.
As far as the town itself, I think you'd have to be proud. You look at this library, it's a nice, and they've built up so many things around town, and I think people are fighting to keep it going, and we should be proud of it.
I'm glad I was raised in Culbertson. We had a lot of fun and a lot of caring people, and I'm glad we were,
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you had to do it all over again, would you stay in Culbertson?
Yes, you bet.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure would.
I
Had a fine
never
school.
lived in anywhere long enough to find out where.
We had a fine school. We had caring people, and it was just really good.
Look what you've got today, a nice little town, and it's fun to come to, and we always come up by 4th of July parade. I always have to drive my Model T. I've got a 1925 Model T coupe that I drive in that, and my grandkids and great-grandkids now just love to participate in that. So we have fondness for this town of Culbertson, and keep it going. See what you can do.
I think that we can tell them thanks for their time and for listening to your stories.
I think that would be a good ending.
Okay, I agree. All right. Thanks, Grandpa.